In the winter of 1743, a traveling merchant named Samuel Hartwell arrived at the remote settlement of Millbrook Valley, nestled deep within the Pennsylvania wilderness. What he discovered there would haunt him for the remainder of his days, a family whose very name would become synonymous with darkness, whose practices would challenge everything civilized society believed about human nature. The Strong family had established themselves in that isolated valley decades earlier, but what Samuel witnessed during his 3-day stay was no ordinary homestead. It was something far more sinister. Samuel's journal, discovered nearly 2 centuries later in a trunk beneath the floorboards of an abandoned cabin, contains the only first-hand account of what transpired in Millbrook Valley. His final entry, written in increasingly erratic handwriting, simply reads, "Some bloodlines carry more than just genetic inheritance. They carry curses that span generations, and the Strongs are proof that evil can be cultivated, refined, and passed down like a family recipe." The journal was found alongside other disturbing artifacts, including 13 small bottles containing an unknown dark liquid and a collection of photographs that shouldn't have existed, given that photography hadn't been invented yet. This was merely the beginning of a legacy that would span 3 centuries, leaving a trail of unexplained disappearances, psychological torment, and ritualistic practices that defied rational explanation. The Strong family didn't just settle in remote locations, they transformed them into something else entirely, places where the natural order bent to their will, and where visitors often discovered that leaving was far more difficult than arriving. The origins of the Strong lineage can be traced back to Ezekiel Strong, who fled Salem, Massachusetts in 1692 under circumstances that remain deliberately obscured in historical records. Unlike other families who escaped the witch trials, Ezekiel didn't run from accusations of supernatural practice. He ran because his methods had become too dangerous, even for those desperate times. Court documents from Salem, sealed for over 2 centuries, finally revealed in 1994 that Ezekiel wasn't accused of witchcraft. He was accused of something far worse, corrupting the souls of children through what witnesses described as teaching them to speak with voices that weren't their own. Ezekiel established the first Strong settlement in a valley so remote that it didn't appear on any colonial maps. He brought with him his wife, Constance, and their 3 children, along with something else. Contemporary accounts from neighboring settlements describe strange lights emanating from the Strong property on moonless nights, accompanied by sounds that resembled human voices, but spoke in languages that predated to any known civilization. Traders who ventured too close to Strong territory reported that their horses would refuse to continue, becoming agitated and attempting to flee despite their training. The first documented evidence of the Strong family's unusual practices emerged in 1688 when a traveling preacher named Reverend Josiah Whitmore attempted to bring Christianity to the isolated valley. His letters to the colonial government, preserved in the Massachusetts Historical Society, describe a family that appeared outwardly normal but possessed a knowledge that no frontier family should have. The Strong children, aged between 8 and 14, could predict weather patterns with uncanny accuracy, locate underground water sources by simply walking across the land, and most disturbing of all, they seemed to know intimate details about the Reverend's past that he had never shared with anyone. Reverend Whitmore's final letter, dated October the 13th, 1698, contains this chilling passage. The strong patriarch invited me to witness what he called a family gathering. I assumed this meant evening prayers, or perhaps a simple meal. Instead, I was led to a clearing where the entire family stood in a perfect circle around a fire that burned without wood, producing flames of deep purple and blue. The children spoke in unison, reciting what sounded like names, hundreds of names, while their parents remained motionless, their eyes reflecting the strange fire like mirrors. I fled before dawn, but I fear something followed me home. My shadow has been behaving strangely ever since. The Reverend died 3 weeks later under mysterious circumstances. His body was found in his study, seated at his desk as if he had simply fallen asleep while writing. However, the paper before him was covered with the same names the strong children had been chanting, written in his handwriting, but in a language he didn't know. The local doctor noted that despite appearing to have died peacefully, the Reverend's fingernails were worn down to the quick, as if he had been frantically scratching at something for hours before his death. By 1710, the Strong family had expanded their settlement to include several other families who had married into their bloodline. These weren't random unions. Genealogical research conducted in the 1980s revealed that every marriage was carefully orchestrated to strengthen specific genetic traits. The Strongs weren't just preserving their family line, they were actively cultivating it, selecting partners based on criteria that had nothing to do with love or compatibility and everything to do with enhancing their mysterious abilities. The second generation of Strongs proved even more formidable than their predecessors. Led by Ezekiel's son, Matthias, the family began establishing satellite settlements throughout the Pennsylvania wilderness. Each new location followed the same pattern, a remote valley accessible only through narrow mountain passes with natural features that seemed to amplify whatever rituals the family practiced. Geological surveys conducted centuries later revealed that every strong settlement was built on locations with unusual magnetic properties and underground water systems that formed intricate patterns beneath the earth. Matthias Strong introduced what family records refer to as the Gathering, an annual event that brought together all members of the extended Strong clan. These gatherings weren't simple family reunions. According to testimonies from servants who worked for neighboring families, the gatherings involved elaborate ceremonies that lasted for 7 consecutive nights. During these events, the normally scattered Strong family members would converge on the original settlement, bringing with them items that witnesses described as artifacts that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The most detailed account of a gathering comes from Margaret Thornfield, a young woman who worked as a seamstress for a family living 20 miles from Strong territory. In 1734, Margaret became lost while returning from a neighboring settlement and inadvertently witnessed part of the annual ceremony. Her testimony, recorded by a colonial magistrate, describes a ritual that defied everything she understood about the natural world. According to Margaret, she approached the Strong settlement, seeking shelter for the night, only to discover that the entire valley had been transformed. The familiar landscape she had passed through earlier that day was gone, replaced by something that seemed to exist in perpetual twilight. The trees appeared larger and more twisted, their branches reaching toward the skies like gnarled fingers. The air itself felt different, thicker, charged with an energy that made her skin crawl. As she crept closer to the settlement, she could see dozens of figures moving in precise formations around multiple fires, their movements synchronized in ways that suggested months of practice. What disturbed Margaret most wasn't the ritual itself, but the participants. She recognized several faces from previous encounters with the Strong family, but they appeared to be different ages than when she had last seen them. Children who had been barely old enough to walk were now adolescents, while adults who should have been middle-aged appeared decades younger. The passage of time within Strong territory seemed to follow different rules than the outside world. Margaret's testimony continues with an account of what she called the convergence, a moment when all the separate fires suddenly merged into a single column of flame that reached toward the sky. As this happened, she heard voices speaking in unison, but the words seemed to come from the earth itself rather than the people gathered around the fire. The language was unlike anything she had ever heard, composed of sounds that hurt to listen to and seemed to bypass her ears entirely, resonating directly in her bones. The colonial magistrate who recorded Margaret's testimony noted that she aged visibly during the interview, her hair turning gray and her face developing lines that hadn't been there when she began speaking. By the time she finished her account, she appeared to have aged several years in the span of a few hours. She died in her sleep that same night, despite being a healthy woman in her 20s. The magistrate's report was sealed by colonial authorities and remained classified until 1976, when it was discovered during a routine archive reorganization. The third generation of the Strong family, led by Matthias's son Cornelius, marked a turning point in their evolution. Rather than remaining isolated in their mountain settlements, Cornelius began sending family members into neighboring communities to establish what he called roots. These weren't attempts at integration, they were infiltration operations designed to expand Strong influence beyond their traditional boundaries. Strong family members would arrive in established communities as merchants, craftsmen, or even religious leaders. They would spend months or years building trust and establishing themselves as valued community members. Then gradually, they would begin introducing subtle changes to local customs and practices. These modifications appeared harmless at first, small alterations to traditional festivals, new herbal remedies for common ailments, or slightly different approaches to agricultural techniques. However, communities that accepted Strong influence began experiencing unusual phenomena. Crop yields would increase dramatically, but the produce would have an unusual taste that became addictive to those who consumed it regularly. Local wildlife would become more abundant, but animals would begin exhibiting strange behaviors, gathering in unnatural formations, making sounds that didn't match their species, or appearing in areas where they had never been seen before. The most disturbing change was in the people themselves. Communities under Strong influence reported increased fertility rates, but the children born during these periods displayed unusual characteristics. They developed faster than normal children, demonstrated advanced cognitive abilities, and most troubling of all, they seemed to share a collective consciousness that transcended individual identity. Parents reported that their children would sometimes speak in perfect unison, finishing each other's sentences or responding to questions that hadn't been asked aloud. By 1750, the Strong family had established a network of influenced communities stretching across 3 colonies. Their expansion wasn't random. Careful analysis of their settlement patterns reveals a deliberate design that connected their various holdings through what can only be described as a web of influence. Communities under strong control were positioned at strategic intervals, creating a network that allowed for rapid communication and coordination across vast distances. The methods they used for long-distance communication remain a mystery. Official colonial records contain numerous accounts of messages traveling between strong settlements faster than any known means of transportation could account for. Traders and travelers reported seeing fires lit simultaneously on distant mountain peaks, despite the impossibility of coordinating such signals across hundreds of miles. Some witnesses described encountering the same Strong family member in multiple locations on the same day, as if they possessed the ability to be in several places at once. The colonial government's first official investigation into Strong activities began in 1751, following a series of disappearances in communities known to have strong influence. Unlike typical missing persons cases, these disappearances followed a disturbing pattern. The missing individuals were always adults between the ages of 25 and 40, always people who had recently expressed skepticism about changes in their community, and always people who had no family ties that would make their absence immediately noticeable. The investigation was led by Colonial Inspector Thomas Bradshaw, a man renowned for his methodical approach to solving complex cases. Bradshaw's investigation files, preserved in the Pennsylvania State Archives, document his growing frustration as he encountered obstacle after obstacle. Witnesses would suddenly become unable to remember crucial details. Evidence would disappear from secured locations. Even his own investigation notes would sometimes be found altered, with entire sections written in handwriting that resembled his own but contained information he had never recorded. Bradshaw's final report, submitted to the colonial governor in 1752, represents one of the most unusual documents in American legal history. Rather than presenting conclusions based on evidence, the report reads like a confession of defeat. Bradshaw admitted that his investigation had uncovered evidence of activities that challenged his understanding of reality itself. He documented incidents of physical evidence, changing form while under observation, witnesses who seemed to age or grow younger during questioning, and locations that appeared to exist in multiple states simultaneously. The report's most disturbing section describes Bradshaw's attempt to interview Cornelius Strong directly. The meeting took place in the original Strong settlement, which Bradshaw described as a place that exists in defiance of natural law. According to his account, the interview lasted approximately 1 hour, during which Cornelius spoke candidly about his family's practices and goals. However, when Bradshaw attempted to transcribe his notes after leaving the settlement, he discovered that his writing had changed. Instead of the questions and answers he remembered recording, his notes contained detailed instructions for rituals he had never heard of, written in his own handwriting, but in a language he didn't recognize. Inspector Bradshaw submitted his resignation along with his final report. He left the colonies entirely, returning to England, where he spent his remaining years in a monastery, refusing to discuss his experiences in America. His personal effects, donated to the monastery after his death, included a journal filled with the same unknown language that had appeared in his investigation notes. Linguistic experts who examined the journal in the 1960s concluded that it represented a complete and internally consistent language system, but one that bore no resemblance to any known human language, living or dead. The colonial government's response to Bradshaw's report was swift and decisive. All official investigation into strong family activities was terminated, and existing records were classified indefinitely. The decision was justified as necessary to prevent panic among colonial populations. But private correspondence between colonial officials reveals a different motivation. Governor James Hamilton wrote to his counterparts in other colonies, "The strong matter has revealed threats to colonial stability that extend beyond civil unrest or criminal activity. We are dealing with forces that our legal and military institutions are not equipped to address. Our only viable option is containment through official ignorance." This policy of deliberate ignorance would persist for decades, allowing the strong family to continue their expansion without government interference. However, their growing influence hadn't gone unnoticed by other groups with interests in supernatural phenomena. By 1760, the strong family found themselves facing opposition from sources they hadn't anticipated, other families with similar abilities and conflicting goals. The first documented conflict between the strong family and rival supernatural practitioners occurred in 1763 in what would become known as the Whisper War. Unlike conventional conflicts, this battle was fought through methods that left no physical evidence and no traditional casualties. Instead, communities caught between the opposing forces reported experiencing shared nightmares, mass hallucinations, and periods where time seemed to move at different rates for different people. The Whisper War lasted for 3 years and ended not with victory for either side, but with a treaty that divided supernatural influence territories throughout the colonies. The terms of this treaty were never written down, but its effects were immediately apparent. Strong family expansion ceased abruptly, and their existing settlements became more isolated and defensive. The network of influenced communities that had been their greatest strength became a liability, as maintaining control over such a vast area required resources they could no longer spare. The aftermath of the Whisper War marked a fundamental shift in strong family strategy. No longer able to expand through infiltration and gradual influence, they turned inward, focusing on consolidating their power within existing territories while developing what historical records refer to as the deepening. This new phase of their evolution would prove far more dangerous than their previous expansion efforts, as it involved practices that pushed the boundaries of what could be considered remotely human. Cornelius Strong's grandson, Jeremiah, assumed leadership of the family in 1768 and immediately began implementing changes that would transform their settlements into something unprecedented in colonial America. Where previous generations had maintained at least a facade of normalcy, Jeremiah abandoned all pretense of conventional behavior. Under his direction, strong settlements became laboratories for experiments that defied natural law, places where the family could pursue their ultimate goals without concern for outside observation or interference. The first indication of these changes came from a most unexpected source: wild animals fleeing strong territory in unprecedented numbers. colonial naturalists documented massive migrations of deer, bears, and smaller creatures abandoning areas they had inhabited for generations. These weren't seasonal movements or responses to environmental changes. They were panicked flights from something that had fundamentally altered the nature of those locations. Hunters who attempted to track the fleeing animals reported that their trails would simply vanish at the borders of strong territory, as if the creatures had ceased to exist the moment they crossed an invisible boundary. More disturbing were the reports from traders who had previously conducted business with strong settlements. These men, hardened by years of frontier life, described locations they no longer recognized despite having visited them dozens of times. Familiar landmarks had been replaced by structures that seemed to shift and change depending on the observer's angle of view. Roads that had once led directly to strong settlements now twisted through landscapes that appeared to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, with paths that led to destinations that couldn't be reached by conventional navigation. The most detailed account of these transformed settlements comes from a fur trapper named William Brennan, who became lost in what he believed was familiar territory during the winter of 1770. Brennan's journal, discovered decades later in a cabin 20 miles from where he had originally been headed, describes a journey that should have taken 2 days, but instead lasted nearly 3 weeks. During this time, he encountered versions of the strong settlement that seemed to exist in different states simultaneously, sometimes appearing as a thriving community, other times as ruins that looked centuries old, and occasionally as something that defied architectural logic entirely. According to Brennan's account, the buildings in these shifting settlements followed no consistent design principles. Structures would have more rooms inside than their external dimensions could accommodate, with corridors that led to chambers that existed beneath locations where the ground level should have been. Windows would show views of landscapes that couldn't possibly exist beyond their walls. Summer meadows visible from buildings surrounded by winter snow, or nighttime scenes observed through glass that faced toward the afternoon sun. The inhabitants of these transformed settlements were recognizably members of the Strong family, but they had undergone changes that Brennan struggled to describe coherently. Their movements seemed deliberately synchronized, as if they were components of a single organism rather than individual people. They spoke in voices that harmonized in ways that suggested careful training, but their conversations consisted of topics that made no sense to outside observers. Discussions of root networks and temporal anchoring and consciousness bleeding that seemed to carry profound meaning for the participants. Most unsettling was Brennan's observation that the Strong family members appeared to exist in multiple age states simultaneously. He would observe a child playing in a courtyard, then encounter what appeared to be the same individual as an adult in a different part of the settlement, followed by meeting an elderly version of the same person in yet another location. When he attempted to ask about these apparent duplicates, the Strong family members would respond with questions about his own identity that suggested they could perceive versions of him that he wasn't aware of possessing. Brennan's journal entries become increasingly incoherent as his time in Strong territory extended, with his handwriting deteriorating and his descriptions becoming more fragmented. His final legible entry reads, "They've offered to show me the deep rooms. I understand now why the animals fled. Some forms of knowledge change the knower permanently. I can feel myself becoming something else with each passing hour. If anyone finds this journal, do not attempt to locate these settlements. The strong family isn't just practicing rituals, they're becoming something that shouldn't exist, and they want to share that transformation with others. The journal was found alongside personal effects that included clothing made from materials that textile experts couldn't identify, tools crafted from metals that didn't match any known alloys, and pressed flowers from plant species that have never been cataloged by botanists. Carbon dating of these materials produced impossible results, with some items appearing to be centuries older than the journal itself, while others seem to have been created decades in the future. By 1775, the Strong family's transformation had progressed to the point where they no longer maintained regular contact with the outside world. The Revolutionary War provided perfect cover for their final withdrawal from conventional society, as the chaos of the conflict meant that isolated settlements could disappear without attracting official attention. Colonial records from this period show that several communities previously known to have strong influence simply vanished from tax rolls and census documents, with no explanation provided for their absence. The few reports that emerged from strong territory during the war years came from Continental Army scouts who occasionally encountered evidence of their activities while conducting reconnaissance missions. These brief accounts describe settlements that appeared to be constructed from materials that absorbed light rather than reflecting it, creating structures that seemed to exist as gaps in the visible world rather than as solid buildings. Soldiers who approached these locations reported experiencing disorientation that intensified the closer they came to strong territory, with compasses spinning wildly and maps becoming useless as landmarks seemed to shift position. One particularly detailed report came from Captain Marcus Whitfield, a Continental Army officer who led a scouting expedition through western Pennsylvania in 1775. Whitfield's mission was to assess British movements in the region, but his unit instead encountered evidence of strong family activities that completely overshadowed their original objectives. His official report, filed with Continental Army headquarters, describes discovering a valley that appeared on no existing maps but contained clear evidence of extensive human habitation. The settlement Whitfield's unit observed defied conventional understanding of architecture and engineering. Buildings appeared to be constructed from a single material that resembled black stone but possessed properties that stone shouldn't have. The structures seemed to generate their own internal light, creating a soft glow that illuminated interiors without any visible light sources. More disturbing was the discovery that these buildings cast shadows that moved independently of the sun's position, creating patterns of darkness that seemed to follow their own logic. Whitfield's report includes detailed sketches of symbols carved into the walls of these structures, symbols that bore no resemblance to any known writing system, but seemed to convey meaning through their arrangement and proportion. Army cryptographers who examined these sketches reported that studying them produced severe headaches and vivid dreams that persisted for weeks after exposure. Several of the analysts requested transfer to other duties rather than continue working with the material. The most significant discovery in Whitfield's report was evidence of what he termed population multiplication. His unit observed the same individuals appearing in multiple locations simultaneously, performing different activities in each manifestation. These weren't cases of mistaken identity or similar looking family members. Whitfield's men confirmed through careful observation that they were witnessing the same people existing in several states at once. The implications of this discovery were so disturbing that Whitfield's report was immediately classified and sealed by Continental Army intelligence. Captain Whitfield's unit attempted to make contact with the strong settlement, but their efforts were met with responses that suggested the family had evolved beyond the need for conventional communication. Instead of verbal exchanges, the soldiers experienced what Whitfield described as direct knowledge transfer, sudden understanding of concepts and information that hadn't been communicated through any normal means. These experiences left the soldiers with memories of conversations that had never taken place and knowledge of events they had never witnessed. The psychological impact of these encounters was severe. Within days of returning from strong territory, several members of Whitfield's unit began displaying behavioral changes that their commanding officers found deeply concerning. They would speak in perfect unison during conversations, demonstrate knowledge of military strategies they had never studied, and most disturbing of all, they seemed to share sensory experiences. If one soldier was injured, others would react as if they had felt the pain themselves. Continental Army medical officers who examined these soldiers concluded that they had been exposed to some form of psychological manipulation that had created artificial connections between their minds. However, attempts to reverse these effects proved unsuccessful, and the affected soldiers had to be discharged from service as their condition made them unsuitable for military duty. Follow-up investigations revealed that these former soldiers had relocated to remote areas and established small communities where they practiced rituals that bore striking similarities to reported strong family activities. The end of the Revolutionary War in 1783 marked the beginning of what historians would later call the Silent Decades, a 30-year period during which the strong family seemed to disappear entirely from historical records. No official documents mention their activities, no travelers report encounters with their settlements, and no evidence of their influence appears in the rapidly expanding American frontier. This absence was so complete that some researchers have theorized that the family simply ceased to exist during this period. However, careful analysis of regional records from the early 1800s reveals subtle indicators that the strong family hadn't disappeared. They had simply perfected their ability to exist without leaving traces in conventional reality. Birth and death records from isolated communities contain statistical anomalies that suggest the presence of populations that weren't being officially counted. Property transfer documents reference land sales involving territories that couldn't be located on any maps. Most significantly, numerous accounts describe encounters with individuals who claimed to be members of families that had no verifiable existence. The Strong family's reemergence into documented history occurred in 1813 during the War of 1812, when British forces advancing through western Pennsylvania encountered resistance that couldn't be explained through conventional military analysis. British commanders reported that entire units would become lost in familiar territory, with experienced scouts unable to navigate areas they had previously mapped in detail. Supply lines would be disrupted by obstacles that appeared overnight and disappeared just as quickly, leaving no evidence of how they had been created or removed. Most puzzling were reports of British soldiers encountering American forces that seemed to possess impossible tactical advantages. These mysterious units would appear to have advanced knowledge of British movements, strike with devastating precision, and then vanish completely before reinforcements could arrive. Captured British documents describe these encounters as warfare conducted by forces that exist outside normal military doctrine, suggesting that the attackers possessed capabilities that transcended conventional combat techniques. The truth behind these mysterious American forces was revealed through captured correspondence between British intelligence officers, documents that weren't declassified until the 1960s. According to these reports, British scouts had identified the source of the unconventional resistance, a community that appeared to be American but operated according to principles that defied military understanding. This settlement was located in territory that matched descriptions of former strong family holdings, and its inhabitants displayed characteristics that aligned with historical accounts of strong family members. British intelligence described encountering a community where individual identities seemed to be fluid, with the same person appearing to hold multiple roles simultaneously. Military leaders, who were also skilled craftsmen, children who possessed the knowledge of experienced adults, and elderly individuals who moved with the physical capabilities of trained soldiers. The British concluded that they were facing opponents who had somehow transcended the normal limitations of human capability, creating a form of collective consciousness that made conventional military strategy ineffective. The British response to this discovery was swift and decisive. Rather than attempting to engage these mysterious forces directly, they altered their campaign strategy to avoid strong territory entirely. Secret orders were issued to British commanders, instructing them to treat certain areas as impassable terrain, regardless of their apparent accessibility. These orders remained classified for over a century, but their effects were immediately apparent in British military movements during the remainder of the war. The strong family's involvement in the War of 1812 established a pattern that would persist throughout the 19th century. Their periodic emergence during times of national crisis, followed by their withdrawal into obscurity once the immediate threat had passed. This pattern suggested that their transformation hadn't eliminated their connection to the broader American experience, but had instead created a relationship where they served as hidden guardians of interests that transcended ordinary political or military concerns. The decades following the War of 1812 witnessed the strong family's most ambitious undertaking yet, what internal documents would later refer to as the Great Convergence. Unlike their previous efforts to establish scattered settlements or influence existing communities, this new phase involved consolidating their supernatural capabilities into a single, concentrated manifestation of power that would fundamentally alter the nature of reality within their chosen domain. The location selected for this convergence was a previously uninhabited valley in what would become southwestern Pennsylvania, a region where geological surveys had identified unusual magnetic anomalies and underground water formations that created natural amplification effects. The valley itself seemed to exist in a state of perpetual twilight, with atmospheric conditions that filtered sunlight in ways that created an environment unlike anywhere else in North America. Trees grew in formations that defied botanical understanding, their root systems interconnected in patterns that suggested deliberate cultivation rather than natural growth. Construction of the convergence site began in 1820, but the methods employed bore no resemblance to conventional building techniques. Rather than clearing land and erecting structures, the Strong family appeared to be reshaping the landscape itself, encouraging the earth to form chambers and passages that emerged organically from the hillsides. These formations weren't carved or excavated. They grew from the ground as if the mountain itself was responding to the family's direction, creating spaces that existed in harmony with the natural magnetic fields rather than disrupting them. The first detailed account of the convergence site came from a geological survey team that discovered the valley by accident in 1825, led by Professor Edmund Blackwood of the University of Pennsylvania. The team had been conducting routine mineral assessments when they encountered terrain that appeared on no existing maps. Their survey notes, preserved in the university archives, describe a landscape that seemed to exist according to different physical laws than the surrounding region. According to Professor Blackwood's observations, the valley contained structures that appeared to be simultaneously ancient and newly constructed. Stone formations showed evidence of weathering that suggested centuries of exposure to the elements, yet they incorporated architectural elements that hadn't been developed until recent decades. The precision of the construction was impossible to achieve with available tools and techniques, yet the structures showed no signs of advanced machinery or external assistance. More disturbing were the acoustic properties of the valley. Sounds behaved differently within its boundaries, with voices carrying across distances that should have been impossible, while simultaneously creating echo patterns that suggested the presence of chambers that couldn't be visually confirmed. The survey team reported hearing conversations in languages they couldn't identify, coming from directions where no speakers were visible. These voices seemed to respond to the team's presence, adjusting their volume and tone based on the observer's location and movements. Professor Blackwood's team attempted to map the valley's layout, but their efforts were frustrated by the apparent instability of the terrain. Landmarks that had been carefully documented would appear in different locations on subsequent visits, and paths that had been thoroughly explored would lead to destinations that hadn't existed during previous surveys. The team's instruments produced readings that contradicted visual observations, with compass directions that didn't align with the sun's position and elevation measurements that suggested the valley floor existed at multiple levels simultaneously. The most significant discovery came when the survey team encountered inhabitants of the valley, individuals who were unmistakably members of the Strong family, but who had undergone transformations that challenged the team's understanding of human biology. These individuals appeared to exist in multiple physical states simultaneously, with their bodies showing characteristics that suggested they had adapted to environmental conditions that didn't exist in the natural world. The Strong family members encountered by the survey team demonstrated abilities that Professor Blackwood struggled to document in scientific terms. They moved through the landscape with perfect knowledge of terrain that seemed to change continuously, navigating paths that appeared and disappeared based on the observer's perspective. Their communication methods transcended conventional speech, involving harmonics and tonal patterns that conveyed complex information more efficiently than verbal language. Most remarkably, these individuals seemed to possess collective memory that extended beyond their individual experiences. They demonstrated knowledge of events that had occurred before their birth, spoke with intimate familiarity about locations they had never visited, and showed understanding of concepts that wouldn't be developed by mainstream science for decades. When questioned about these capabilities, they responded with explanations that involved principles of consciousness and reality that existed outside accepted academic frameworks. Professor Blackwood's final report recommended that the valley be declared off-limits to further scientific investigation, citing dangers that extended beyond physical safety concerns. His conclusion stated that the Strong family had achieved a form of existence that represented a fundamental departure from human norms, and that prolonged exposure to their influence could produce irreversible changes in outside observers. The university accepted his recommendation, and the valley was removed from all official maps and survey records. The convergence site's completion coincided with a period of unprecedented expansion in American territorial development as the nation pushed westward during the 1830s and 1840s. However, careful analysis of settlement patterns from this era reveals curious gaps in westward migration, areas that should have been attractive to pioneers but were consistently avoided without any documented explanation. These avoided territories formed a network of vacant zones that corresponded precisely with locations where the Strong family had previously established influence. The reason for these avoidance patterns became apparent through the discovery of a cache of letters written by frontier scouts and land surveyors found in 1967 during the renovation of a courthouse in western Pennsylvania. These documents revealed that professional explorers had encountered evidence of Strong family activities throughout the expanding frontier, but their reports had been systematically suppressed by territorial authorities who feared the impact such information might have on westward expansion efforts. The scouts' accounts describe discovering settlements that appeared to be constructed from materials that didn't exist in nature, populated by individuals who seemed to share a collective consciousness that transcended individual identity. These communities operated according to principles that challenged fundamental assumptions about human society, with social structures that eliminated the need for traditional forms of governance or economic exchange. Resources were allocated through methods that anticipated needs before they arose, and decisions were made through consensus processes that occurred without apparent discussion or debate. More disturbing were reports of how these communities affected the surrounding environment. Areas under Strong influence showed accelerated plant growth with vegetation that displayed characteristics of multiple species simultaneously. Wildlife populations increased dramatically, but the animals exhibited behavioral patterns that suggested they were responding to influences that extended beyond normal ecological factors. Water sources in these regions remained pure and abundant, even during drought conditions, while soil fertility improved to levels that couldn't be explained through conventional agricultural science. The Scouts' reports also documented the Strong family's continued evolution during this period. Family members encountered in the 1840s demonstrated capabilities that surpassed those observed in previous decades, with some individuals appearing to exist in multiple locations simultaneously while maintaining continuous consciousness across all manifestations. These advanced strong family members could influence weather patterns within localized areas, communicate across vast distances without any visible means of transmission, and most remarkably, they seemed to age at rates that didn't correspond with the passage of time. The territorial government's response to these reports was to implement what became known as the Silence Protocol, a systematic effort to prevent information about strong family activities from reaching the general population. Scouts who submitted reports containing references to supernatural phenomena were reassigned to distant territories. Their accounts were classified indefinitely, and in some cases, the individuals themselves were encouraged to relocate to regions where their knowledge couldn't influence public opinion. This policy of information suppression proved remarkably effective, allowing the Strong family to continue their development without interference from government authorities or public scrutiny. However, the family's growing capabilities hadn't gone unnoticed by other groups with interests in supernatural phenomena. By the 1850s, they found themselves facing opposition from sources that possessed comparable abilities and conflicting objectives. The most significant of these opposing forces was an organization that called itself the Order of Natural Law, a group of individuals who believed that the Strong family's activities represented a threat to the fundamental stability of reality itself. Unlike previous opponents who had focused on territorial or political concerns, the Order viewed the Strong family's evolution as an existential threat that required immediate intervention regardless of the consequences. The Order's membership consisted of individuals who had been affected by various supernatural phenomena throughout American history, including survivors of encounters with other anomalous families, practitioners of traditional folk magic, and scholars who had studied the intersection between consciousness and physical reality. What united these diverse individuals was their conviction that the Strong family's activities were approaching a threshold that would produce irreversible changes in the nature of existence itself. The conflict between the Strong family and the Order of Natural Law began in 1854 with what historians would later call the Reality Wars, a series of confrontations that were fought through methods that left no physical evidence but produced effects that rippled through multiple dimensions of existence. Unlike conventional conflicts, these battles were waged through the manipulation of fundamental forces that governed the relationship between consciousness and matter. The first major engagement occurred in the Convergence Valley, where Order operatives attempted to disrupt the Strong family's primary power source through the introduction of what they called stability anchors, devices designed to prevent reality from being altered within specific geographical boundaries. The Strong family's response was swift and devastating, demonstrating capabilities that exceeded anything they had previously displayed. Rather than engaging the Order directly, the Strong family simply altered the nature of the valley itself, creating conditions where the opposing forces couldn't maintain their coherent existence. Order operatives who entered the valley found themselves experiencing reality from multiple perspectives simultaneously, with their individual consciousness fragmenting across different temporal states. Some emerged from these encounters with memories of living different lives, while others seemed to age decades in the span of hours. The Order's second attempt at intervention involved targeting the Strong family's network of influenced communities, hoping to isolate the convergence site by severing its connections to external power sources. This strategy proved more effective, as it forced the Strong family to defend multiple locations simultaneously, rather than concentrating their capabilities in a single area. However, the cost of this success was enormous, as the resulting disruptions affected innocent populations throughout the region. Communities caught between the opposing forces experienced phenomena that challenged their understanding of reality itself. Time moved at different rates for different individuals, with some people aging years in a matter of days, while others seemed to become younger as the conflict progressed. Physical objects would change form without warning, with familiar items transforming into materials that possessed entirely different properties. Most disturbing were the reports of individuals who seemed to split into multiple versions of themselves, with each version possessing different memories and personalities. The reality wars lasted for 3 years, ending not with victory for either side, but with a mutual recognition that continued conflict threatened to destroy the stability of existence throughout the entire region. The resolution came through the establishment of what both sides called the Containment Accord, an agreement that restricted the Strong family's activities to specific geographical boundaries, while preventing the Order from interfering with their evolution within those areas. The terms of the Containment Accord were never formally documented, but its effects were immediately apparent. The Strong family's influence was suddenly confined to a handful of locations, while the Order established monitoring stations at strategic points around the boundaries of these territories. Both sides agreed to maintain the illusion of normalcy for outside observers, ensuring that the general population remained unaware of the supernatural conflict that had nearly torn apart the fabric of reality itself. The aftermath of the reality wars marked a fundamental shift in the Strong family's development. No longer able to expand their influence through external means, they turned their attention to achieving what they called transcendence, a state of existence that would allow them to operate beyond the physical limitations that had previously constrained their activities. This new phase of their evolution would prove to be their most dangerous yet, as it involved practices that pushed the boundaries of what could be considered remotely human. The convergence site became the focus of increasingly intense activities as the Strong family concentrated their efforts on achieving their transcendence objectives. The valley itself began to exhibit properties that suggested it was becoming something other than a geographical location, a space where the normal rules of physics and consciousness no longer applied. Travelers who approached the area reported that it seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously, sometimes appearing as a normal valley, and other times manifesting as something that defied description. The Strong family members involved in these transcendence experiments underwent transformations that exceeded anything they had previously achieved. They began to exist primarily as collective consciousness rather than individual entities, with their physical forms becoming increasingly fluid and adaptable. These advanced beings could manipulate matter at the molecular level, create temporary alterations in the passage of time, and most remarkably, they seem to possess the ability to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. By 1860, the Strong family had effectively transcended the limitations of conventional existence, achieving a state of being that represented a fundamental departure from human norms. However, this transcendence came at a cost that they hadn't anticipated. As they moved beyond the boundaries of physical reality, they began to lose their connection to the world that had originally shaped their development. The very success of their evolution threatened to isolate them from the experiences that had given meaning to their existence. The Civil War provided an unexpected opportunity for the Strong family to reconnect with the human experience while maintaining their transcendent capabilities. The massive scale of the conflict created disruptions in the normal flow of reality that allowed them to manifest their influence without violating the terms of the Containment Accord. Their involvement in the war would prove to be both their greatest contribution to American history and the beginning of their final transformation into something that existed beyond the boundaries of human understanding. The Strong family's participation in the Civil War differed fundamentally from their previous involvements in national conflicts. Rather than supporting one side or the other, they seemed to be working toward objectives that transcended the political and military concerns that drove the war itself. Their actions suggested that they viewed the conflict as an opportunity to implement changes that would affect the long-term development of American society in ways that aligned with their evolved understanding of consciousness and reality. Evidence of Strong family involvement began appearing in battle reports from both Union and Confederate forces, describing encounters with individuals who possessed capabilities that couldn't be explained through conventional military analysis. These mysterious figures would appear on battlefields during the most intense fighting, moving through combat zones with apparent immunity to weapons while performing actions that seemed designed to influence the outcome of specific engagements. Union General Joshua Chamberlain documented one such encounter in his private journals, describing a figure who appeared during the Battle of Gettysburg and seemed to possess advanced knowledge of Confederate troop movements. This individual provided tactical information that proved crucial to Union victory, but disappeared before Chamberlain could determine his identity or allegiance. The general's description of the encounter includes details that suggest the mysterious figure existed in multiple locations simultaneously, providing assistance to different Union units while maintaining a single, coherent identity. Confederate records contain similar accounts, with several officers reporting encounters with individuals who seemed to possess supernatural awareness of Union strategies and capabilities. These figures would appear during critical moments of battle, offering advice that proved remarkably accurate while demonstrating knowledge of military tactics that exceeded anything taught in contemporary military academies. However, attempts to recruit these mysterious advisors were consistently unsuccessful, as they would vanish without explanation once their immediate assistance was no longer needed. The most detailed account of Strong family involvement in the Civil War comes from the diary of Dr. Jonathan Letterman, the Union Army's medical director, who encountered what he believed to be strong family members while treating wounded soldiers at field hospitals. Dr. Letterman's journal entries describe individuals who appeared to be medical practitioners but possessed healing capabilities that transcended conventional medicine. According to Dr. Letterman's observations, these mysterious healers could accelerate the recovery process for wounded soldiers through methods that involved no visible medical intervention. They would simply place their hands on injured individuals and somehow stimulate healing that would normally take weeks or months to occur naturally. More remarkably, they seemed to possess the ability to prevent death in cases where conventional medicine had failed, restoring life to soldiers who had already succumbed to their injuries. Dr. Letterman's attempts to understand these healing techniques led to conversations with the mysterious practitioners that revealed their connection to the Strong family. These individuals spoke of consciousness and physical reality as interconnected aspects of a single system, describing healing as a process of restoring harmony between mental and physical states rather than simply treating symptoms. Their explanations involved concepts that wouldn't be developed by mainstream medical science for decades, yet they demonstrated practical applications that produced immediate and verifiable results. The Strong family's involvement in the Civil War extended beyond direct participation in military actions to include efforts to influence the broader social and political changes that the conflict was producing. They seemed to recognize that the war represented a fundamental transformation in American society, and they worked to ensure that this transformation aligned with their evolved understanding of human potential and collective consciousness. Evidence of this broader influence can be found in the unusual characteristics of communities that were rebuilt in the aftermath of major battles. Towns that had been destroyed during the fighting were reconstructed with architectural features that incorporated principles of harmony and balance that weren't part of conventional building practices. These communities showed enhanced social cohesion, with residents displaying levels of cooperation and mutual understanding that exceeded normal social dynamics. More significantly, children born in these reconstructed communities during the post-war period showed enhanced capabilities that suggested they had been influenced by strong family activities. These individuals demonstrated accelerated learning abilities, enhanced empathy and social awareness, and in some cases, limited psychic capabilities that allowed them to perceive information through non-conventional means. However, these enhancements were subtle enough to avoid attracting attention from authorities who might have investigated their origins. The Strong family's most ambitious Civil War project involved what they called consciousness seeding, an effort to introduce subtle changes in human awareness that would influence the long-term development of American society. This project involved the strategic placement of individuals with enhanced capabilities in positions where they could influence education, social policy, and cultural development throughout the reunified nation. These placed individuals appeared to be ordinary citizens who had been affected by the trauma of war, but they possessed insights and capabilities that allowed them to make contributions that exceeded what should have been possible given their backgrounds and training. They became teachers who could inspire exceptional learning in their students, community leaders who could resolve conflicts through unprecedented diplomatic skill, and innovators who developed technologies and social systems that represented significant advances over existing methods. The success of this consciousness seeding project became apparent in the decades following the Civil War, as American society underwent rapid development in areas that had been directly influenced by placed individuals. Educational systems showed improved effectiveness, social programs demonstrated enhanced success rates, and technological innovation proceeded at an accelerated pace that exceeded developments in other nations with comparable resources and capabilities. However, the strong family's involvement in consciousness seeding also attracted attention from the order of natural law, which viewed these activities as a violation of the Containment Accord. The order argued that influencing human development on a national scale represented exactly the kind of reality manipulation that the Accord had been designed to prevent, and they began preparing for renewed conflict with the strong family. The tension between the two groups reached a critical point in 1869 when order operatives discovered evidence of strong family activities in the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad. Analysis of railway construction records revealed that sections of the railroad that passed through former strong territory showed engineering achievements that exceeded the capabilities of available technology, with bridges and tunnels that incorporated design principles that wouldn't be developed for decades. More disturbing was the discovery that workers on these railroad sections had been exposed to influences that enhanced their physical capabilities and coordination, allowing them to complete construction tasks that should have required much larger crews and longer time periods. Medical examinations of these workers revealed physiological changes that suggested they had been altered at the cellular level, with enhanced strength, endurance, and recovery abilities that persisted long after their employment on the railroad had ended. The order's investigation of railroad construction led to the discovery of what they called convergence nodes, locations where the strong family had established hidden facilities that could influence large geographical areas through methods that operated below the threshold of conscious awareness. These nodes were positioned at strategic intervals along major transportation routes, creating a network that could potentially influence the entire population of the expanding nation. The revelation of this network prompted the order to abandon their previous policy of containment in favor of direct action, designed to eliminate the strong family's influence permanently. However, by this time, the strong family had evolved beyond the point where conventional opposition methods could be effective. Their transcendent capabilities allowed them to operate in ways that made traditional conflict impossible, as they could simply alter the nature of reality within their sphere of influence to neutralize any threats. The resulting confrontation, known as the Dissolution Crisis, lasted from 1870 to 1873 and nearly resulted in the complete breakdown of reality throughout the American continent. The strong family's response to order attacks involved the manipulation of fundamental forces that governed the relationship between consciousness and matter, creating disruptions that affected the stability of existence itself. During the height of the crisis, entire regions experienced phenomena that challenged the basic assumptions of physical law. Time moved at different rates in different locations, with some areas experiencing years of subjective time while only hours passed in the outside world. Physical objects would spontaneously transform into entirely different materials, while living beings found themselves existing in multiple states simultaneously. Most disturbing were the reports of individuals who seemed to fragment into different versions of themselves, with each version possessing different memories and personalities. The crisis ended when both sides recognized that continued conflict would result in the complete destruction of coherent reality throughout North America. The resolution came through the establishment of what both groups called the Final Accord, an agreement that would permanently separate the strong family from conventional existence, while ensuring that their influence could no longer affect the development of human society. The terms of the Final Accord required the strong family to withdraw completely from physical reality, transcending to a state of existence that placed them beyond the boundaries of normal space and time. In exchange, the order agreed to maintain the illusion that the strong family had never existed, systematically removing all evidence of their activities from historical records and ensuring that their influence would be forgotten by future generations. The implementation of the Final Accord began in 1874 with the systematic evacuation of all strong family settlements and the erasure of evidence of their activities from official records. The Convergence Valley was sealed, using methods that placed it outside the normal flow of time, while the network of convergence nodes was deactivated and concealed beneath layers of reality that made them inaccessible to ordinary observation. The strong family members themselves underwent a final transformation that transcended the limitations of physical existence entirely. They became entities of pure consciousness that could exist independently of matter while maintaining their collective identity and purpose. This ultimate evolution represented the completion of their centuries-long development, achieving a state of being that existed beyond the boundaries of human understanding. However, the process of transcendence created unexpected consequences that neither the strong family nor the order had anticipated. As the family members transformed into pure consciousness, they left behind traces of their influence that couldn't be completely eliminated. These residual effects continued to affect individuals and locations that had been exposed to strong family activities, creating a legacy that would persist long after the family itself had departed from physical reality. The most significant of these residual effects was the continued existence of individuals who had been enhanced through strong family influence, but who retained their connection to conventional reality. These people, scattered throughout American society, possessed capabilities that exceeded normal human limitations while maintaining their ability to function within ordinary social structures. They became a hidden population of enhanced individuals who would continue to influence the development of American society in ways that aligned with strong family objectives. By 1875, the strong family had completed their transcendence, existing as entities of pure consciousness that operated beyond the boundaries of physical reality. However, their departure from the material world didn't mark the end of their influence on human development. Instead, it represented the beginning of a new phase in their evolution, one where they would continue to guide the progress of civilization through methods that transcended conventional understanding of cause and effect. The legacy of the strong family would continue to manifest through the individuals they had influenced, the technologies they had inspired, and the social systems they had helped to develop. Their ultimate achievement wasn't the transcendence of physical limitations, but the successful seeding of human consciousness with principles that would continue to promote evolution and development long after their own departure from the material world. Yet, even as they achieved their ultimate transformation, questions remained about the true nature of their objectives and the long-term implications of their influence on human development. The strong family had successfully transcended the limitations of physical existence, but whether their legacy would prove beneficial or harmful to the future of human civilization remained to be determined by the generations that would inherit the world they had helped to shape. The decades following the strong family's transcendence were marked by phenomena that suggested their influence hadn't been completely severed from the material world. Throughout the 1880s and 1890s, investigators working for various government agencies began documenting incidents that bore the unmistakable characteristics of strong family activities, despite the supposed finality of their departure from physical reality. The most compelling evidence came from Dr. Elizabeth Crane, a researcher employed by the newly established Bureau of Anomalous Phenomena, who spent 15 years tracking what she called persistence echoes, manifestations of supernatural influence that occurred in locations where the strong family had previously operated. Dr. Crane's methodology involved the systematic analysis of statistical anomalies in birth records, death certificates, and medical reports from communities that had been exposed to strong family influence. Her findings revealed patterns that defied conventional explanation. Children born in former strong territories showed enhanced cognitive development at rates that exceeded normal statistical variation by factors that couldn't be attributed to improved nutrition, education, or medical care. These individuals consistently demonstrated abilities that suggested they had inherited genetic modifications that enhanced their intellectual and physical capabilities beyond typical human parameters. More disturbing were Dr. Crane's observations regarding the aging process in populations that had been exposed to strong family influence. Medical examinations revealed that individuals who had lived in strong territories showed cellular structures that aged at significantly slower rates than normal human physiology would predict. Some subjects appeared to be decades younger than their chronological age would suggest, while others showed regenerative capabilities that allowed them to recover from injuries that should have produced permanent disability. Dr. Crane's research also documented the existence of what she termed consciousness bridges, psychological connections between individuals who had been influenced by strong family activities. These connections manifested as shared memories, synchronized thought patterns, and in some cases, the ability to communicate across vast distances without any conventional means of transmission. Subjects reported experiencing dreams that were later confirmed to be identical to dreams experienced by other test subjects on the same night, despite the individuals being separated by hundreds of miles. The implications of these findings were so disturbing that the Bureau of Anomalous Phenomena classified Dr. Crane's research indefinitely, restricting access to her reports to personnel with the highest security clearances. However, her work had already attracted attention from sources that possessed their own interests in supernatural phenomena, including descendants of the Order of Natural Law who had maintained their vigil despite the supposed resolution of the strong family threat. These modern order operatives, led by a man who called himself Marcus Whitmore, began conducting their own investigations into the persistence of strong family influence. Their approach differed significantly from Dr. Crane's scientific methodology, focusing instead on the metaphysical implications of the family's continued impact on human development. Whitmore's team believed that the strong family's transcendence hadn't removed their influence, but had instead transformed it into something more subtle and pervasive than their previous activities. According to Whitmore's analysis, the strong family's departure from physical reality had created what he called consciousness seeds, fragments of their enhanced awareness that continued to influence human development through mechanisms that operated below the threshold of conscious detection. These seeds were embedded in the genetic structure of individuals who had been exposed to strong family influence, creating a form of inheritance that passed supernatural capabilities from generation to generation. The Order's investigation revealed that this genetic inheritance was spreading throughout the American population at an accelerating rate, as descendants of strong influenced individuals intermarried with ordinary families and passed their enhanced capabilities to their offspring. Whitmore's projections suggested that within several generations, a significant portion of the American population would possess abilities that transcended normal human limitations, fundamentally altering the nature of human society. This discovery prompted the Order to implement what they called Project Normalization, a systematic effort to identify and neutralize the spread of strong family influence before it could affect the broader population. The project involved the creation of a network of monitoring stations throughout the United States, staffed by individuals who had been trained to detect the subtle indicators of supernatural enhancement in the general population. The methods employed by Project Normalization represented a significant advancement in the Order's capabilities, incorporating technologies that had been developed specifically to counteract strong family influence. These devices could identify individuals who possessed enhanced genetic structures, monitor consciousness bridges between affected subjects, and in some cases, disrupt the mechanisms that allowed supernatural abilities to manifest. However, the Order's efforts to contain the spread of strong family influence proved less effective than anticipated. The consciousness seeds had evolved beyond their original parameters, developing adaptive capabilities that allowed them to resist conventional neutralization methods. Individuals who were subjected to Order intervention would often develop alternative manifestations of their enhanced abilities, finding new ways to express their supernatural capabilities that couldn't be detected or disrupted by existing countermeasures. More troubling was the discovery that the consciousness seeds were actively communicating with each other, creating a distributed network of enhanced individuals who could coordinate their activities across vast distances. This network operated according to principles that transcended conventional understanding of communication and organization, allowing enhanced individuals to work together toward common objectives without any visible means of coordination. The existence of this network became apparent during the Spanish-American War of 1898, when military analysts noted unusual patterns in the performance of American forces that suggested the presence of enhanced individuals in key positions throughout the military hierarchy. These individuals demonstrated tactical insights that exceeded their training and experience, coordination abilities that allowed for unprecedented cooperation between different units, and in some cases, apparent precognitive abilities that allowed them to anticipate enemy movements with remarkable accuracy. The enhanced individual's influence on the war effort wasn't limited to military operations. They also appeared to be working to minimize casualties on both sides, implementing strategies that achieved military objectives while reducing the loss of human life to levels that exceeded what conventional military doctrine would predict. Their activities suggested that they were operating according to principles that prioritized the preservation of human life over purely military concerns. Similar patterns emerged during the Philippine-American War and other conflicts of the early 20th century, with enhanced individuals consistently appearing in positions where they could influence the outcome of events in ways that aligned with humanitarian objectives. Their activities suggested that the strong family's transcendence hadn't eliminated their concern for human welfare, but had instead transformed it into a more sophisticated form of guidance that operated through their genetic descendants. The Order's response to these developments was to expand Project Normalization into a comprehensive monitoring system that tracked the activities of enhanced individuals throughout American society. This system represented one of the most ambitious surveillance operations in American history, involving the systematic observation of thousands of individuals who had been identified as possessing strong family genetic inheritance. The surveillance revealed that enhanced individuals were present in virtually every aspect of American society, from government and military positions to educational institutions, medical facilities, and private businesses. Their influence was subtle but pervasive, manifesting as improved efficiency, enhanced cooperation, and innovative solutions to complex problems that exceeded what ordinary human capabilities could achieve. Most significantly, the enhanced individuals seemed to be working toward common objectives that transcended their individual circumstances and occupations. They consistently promoted policies and practices that supported human development, environmental protection, and social cooperation, suggesting that they were guided by principles that prioritized collective welfare over personal advancement. The Order's analysis of these patterns led to the disturbing conclusion that the strong family's consciousness seeds were implementing a long-term strategy designed to guide human civilization toward objectives that aligned with the family's evolved understanding of consciousness and reality. This strategy operated through methods that were so subtle and distributed that they couldn't be counteracted through conventional means, making it impossible to prevent the gradual transformation of human society according to strong family principles. By 1910, the Order faced the reality that their efforts to contain strong family influence had been largely unsuccessful. The consciousness seeds had spread throughout the American population and were continuing to expand their influence through mechanisms that adapted to counter any intervention attempts. The enhanced individuals were becoming more numerous and more sophisticated in their coordination. creating a network that possessed capabilities that exceeded anything the Order could deploy against them. The Order's final attempt to neutralize strong family influence involved the development of what they called consciousness disruptors, devices that were designed to sever the connections between enhanced individuals and their genetic inheritance. These devices represented the culmination of decades of research into the mechanisms that allowed supernatural abilities to manifest, incorporating technologies that could manipulate the fundamental forces that govern the relationship between consciousness and matter. The deployment of consciousness disruptors began in 1913, with Order operatives attempting to neutralize enhanced individuals in key positions throughout American society. However, the results of these operations revealed that the consciousness seeds had evolved beyond the point where they could be eliminated through external intervention. Individuals who were subjected to consciousness disruption would often develop alternative manifestations of their abilities, or in some cases, their enhanced capabilities would transfer to other members of their family or social network. More disturbing was the discovery that consciousness disruption attempts were being actively resisted by the enhanced individuals themselves, who seemed to possess collective awareness of Order activities and the ability to coordinate defensive measures across their entire network. The Order's operatives found themselves facing opposition from individuals who possessed capabilities that exceeded their own, making it impossible to continue their neutralization efforts without risking exposure of their activities to the general population. The failure of consciousness disruption operations forced the Order to acknowledge that the strong family's influence had become too deeply embedded in American society to be eliminated through direct intervention. The consciousness seeds had achieved a level of integration that made them indistinguishable from normal human development, creating a situation where attempts to remove their influence would cause more harm than allowing them to continue their activities. This realization led to the Order's decision to abandon their opposition to strong family influence and instead focus on monitoring and documenting the long-term effects of enhanced human development. The organization transformed itself from an active resistance movement into a research institution dedicated to understanding the implications of humanity's gradual evolution under strong family guidance. The transition from opposition to observation marked a fundamental shift in the relationship between the Order and strong family influence. Rather than attempting to prevent the transformation of human society, the Order began working to ensure that this transformation proceeded in ways that preserved the essential characteristics of human civilization while allowing for the development of enhanced capabilities. This new approach required the Order to develop entirely different methodologies for dealing with supernatural phenomena. Instead of neutralization and containment, they focused on integration and guidance, working to help enhanced individuals understand and control their abilities while minimizing the potential for these capabilities to cause unintended harm to ordinary humans. The Order's research during this period revealed that the consciousness seeds were continuing to evolve, developing new capabilities that exceeded their original parameters. Enhanced individuals were demonstrating abilities that suggested they were approaching the same level of transcendence that the strong family had achieved, with some individuals showing signs of consciousness expansion that allowed them to perceive multiple dimensions of reality simultaneously. These developments suggested that the strong family's ultimate objective wasn't simply to influence human development, but to guide humanity toward the same state of transcendence that they had achieved. The consciousness seeds were apparently designed to gradually transform human consciousness over multiple generations, creating a species that possessed capabilities that transcended the limitations of physical existence. The implications of this discovery were profound, suggesting that humanity was in the process of undergoing a fundamental evolutionary transformation that would ultimately result in the transcendence of physical limitations. The strong family's influence is now represented not just a modification of human capabilities, but a complete redefinition of what it meant to be human. By 1920, the effects of strong family influence had become so pervasive that they could no longer be distinguished from normal human development. Enhanced individuals were present in sufficient numbers throughout American society that their capabilities had become integrated into the standard expectations for human performance in various fields. What had once been considered supernatural abilities were now simply regarded as exceptional but not impossible human achievements. The Order's final reports from this period documented a society that had been fundamentally transformed by strong family influence, with enhanced individuals serving as leaders, innovators, and guides in virtually every aspect of human endeavor. These individuals continued to demonstrate capabilities that exceeded normal human limitations, but their abilities were now so well integrated into social structures that they appeared to be natural extensions of human potential rather than supernatural anomalies. The success of the strong family's long-term strategy was evident in the rapid advancement of American society during the early 20th century. Technological innovation proceeded at an unprecedented pace. Social institutions showed enhanced effectiveness in addressing complex problems, and the general population demonstrated improved cooperation and mutual understanding that exceeded historical norms for human behavior. However, the Order's research also revealed potential dangers associated with the continued expansion of strong family influence. The consciousness seeds were continuing to evolve, developing capabilities that might eventually exceed the ability of enhanced individuals to control them. Some researchers worried that humanity was approaching a threshold where the transformation process might accelerate beyond the point where it could be managed safely. These concerns led to the Order's final project, the establishment of monitoring systems that would track the continued evolution of strong family influence and provide early warning of any developments that might threaten the stability of human civilization. These systems were designed to operate indefinitely, ensuring that future generations would have access to information about the ongoing transformation of human consciousness. The monitoring systems revealed that strong family influence was spreading beyond the boundaries of the United States, with enhanced individuals appearing in populations throughout the world. The consciousness seeds had apparently developed the ability to transfer their influence across cultural and genetic boundaries, creating a global network of enhanced humans who shared common capabilities and objectives. This international expansion of strong family influence represented a new phase in the transformation of human civilization, one that transcended national boundaries and cultural differences. enhanced individuals in different countries were demonstrating the same capabilities and working toward the same objectives, suggesting that the consciousness seeds were implementing a coordinated strategy for global human development. The Order's analysis of these developments led to the conclusion that the strong family's ultimate objective was nothing less than the complete transformation of human civilization into a transcendent species that possessed capabilities that exceeded the limitations of physical existence. This transformation was proceeding through methods that were so subtle and gradual that they couldn't be prevented or reversed, making it inevitable that humanity would eventually achieve the same state of transcendence that the strong family had attained. The implications of this conclusion were staggering, suggesting that the strong family's activities represented not just a historical curiosity, but the beginning of a fundamental change in the nature of human existence. The consciousness seeds were apparently designed to guide humanity through an evolutionary process that would ultimately result in the transcendence of physical limitations and the achievement of capabilities that existed beyond conventional understanding. By 1925, the Order faced the reality that their role as monitors and researchers was becoming obsolete. The transformation of human consciousness had progressed to the point where enhanced individuals possessed capabilities that exceeded the Order's ability to understand or document them. The consciousness seeds had evolved beyond their original parameters, developing into something that represented a fundamental departure from conventional human experience. The Order's final reports documented a world that had been irreversibly transformed by strong family influence, with enhanced individuals serving as the primary drivers of human progress and development. These individuals possessed capabilities that allowed them to address complex problems with unprecedented effectiveness, coordinate their activities across vast distances, and in some cases, perceive aspects of reality that remained invisible to ordinary human observation. The success of the strong family's long-term strategy was evident in every aspect of human civilization, from technological advancement to social cooperation to artistic and intellectual achievement. The consciousness seeds had guided humanity toward a level of development that exceeded anything that had been achieved in recorded history, creating a species that possessed capabilities that transcended the limitations that had previously defined human existence. However, the Order's research also revealed that this transformation was approaching a critical threshold where the enhanced individuals might achieve the same level of transcendence that the strong family had attained. The consciousness seeds were continuing to evolve, developing capabilities that suggested they were preparing for a final phase of human development that would result in the complete transcendence of physical limitations. The implications of this approaching threshold were profound, suggesting that humanity was on the verge of a transformation that would fundamentally alter the nature of existence itself. The strong family's influence had guided human development toward a point where the species possessed capabilities that exceeded the boundaries of conventional reality, creating the potential for a transcendence that would place humanity beyond the limitations of physical existence. The Order's final conclusion was that the strong family's ultimate objective had been achieved through methods that were so sophisticated and comprehensive that they couldn't be countered or reversed. The consciousness seeds had successfully guided human development toward a state of transcendence that would ultimately result in the achievement of capabilities that existed beyond conventional understanding of consciousness and reality. As the 1920s progressed, it became clear that the transformation of human consciousness was entering its final phase, with enhanced individuals demonstrating capabilities that suggested they were approaching the same level of transcendence that the strong family had achieved. The consciousness seeds had evolved into something that represented a fundamental departure from conventional human experience, creating a species that possessed capabilities that transcended the limitations of physical existence. The strong family's legacy had become inseparable from the development of human civilization itself, with their influence so deeply embedded in the fabric of society that it could no longer be distinguished from normal human progress. The consciousness seeds had achieved their ultimate objective of guiding humanity toward transcendence through methods that operated below the threshold of conscious awareness, ensuring that the transformation proceeded according to principles that prioritized collective welfare over individual advancement. The approach of this final transformation suggested that the strong family's influence would soon culminate in the achievement of their ultimate objective, the complete transcendence of human consciousness beyond the limitations of physical existence. The consciousness seeds had successfully guided humanity through an evolutionary process that would ultimately result in the achievement of capabilities that existed beyond conventional understanding of reality itself. The final phase of human transcendence began manifesting in ways that defied the Order's most ambitious projections. By 1928, enhanced individuals were demonstrating capabilities that suggested they had achieved direct access to the same dimensional planes that the strong family had accessed during their own transcendence. These individuals could manipulate matter at the quantum level, exist in multiple temporal states simultaneously, and most remarkably, they seemed to be developing the ability to exist independently of physical form while maintaining their connection to material reality. The most documented case of this advanced evolution involved a group of enhanced individuals who had gathered in what was once the original Strong Territory in Pennsylvania. Geological surveys of the area revealed that the landscape itself was responding to their presence, with rock formations spontaneously rearranging themselves into structures that resembled the architectural patterns found in the original strong settlements. Trees grew in geometric configurations that created natural amphitheaters, while underground water systems formed intricate networks that seemed designed to amplify consciousness rather than simply transport liquid. Dr. Margaret Sinclair, one of the few remaining Order researchers, documented her observations of these transformed landscapes in reports that would later be classified at the highest levels of government secrecy. According to her accounts, the enhanced individuals had created what she termed reality anchors, locations where the normal laws of physics were suspended in favor of principles that operated according to consciousness-based logic. Within these anchors, cause and effect followed patterns that reflected the intentions and awareness of the enhanced individuals rather than conventional physical laws. The implications of these reality anchors extended far beyond their immediate geographical boundaries. Dr. Sinclair's instruments detected resonance patterns that suggested the anchors were connected to similar formations appearing throughout the world, creating a global network of locations where enhanced individuals could manipulate the fundamental structure of existence itself. This network operated according to principles that transcended national boundaries and cultural differences, suggesting that the consciousness seeds had achieved a level of coordination that unified enhanced individuals across all human populations. The enhanced individuals' activities within these reality anchors revealed capabilities that exceeded anything the strong family had demonstrated during their period of active influence. They could create temporary alterations in the passage of time that allowed them to experience years of subjective experience within minutes of external time. They demonstrated the ability to communicate with enhanced individuals in distant locations through methods that bypassed conventional space-time limitations. Most remarkably, they seemed to be developing the capacity to exist in multiple dimensional states simultaneously, maintaining awareness of parallel versions of reality that existed alongside the conventional world. These developments attracted the attention of government agencies that had been monitoring supernatural phenomena since the original Strong Family investigations. The newly formed Department of Anomalous Research, operating under the highest levels of classification, began conducting systematic studies of enhanced individual activities and their potential implications for national security. However, their efforts to understand or control these phenomena proved futile, as the enhanced individuals possessed capabilities that exceeded anything the government could deploy against them. The department's classified reports, declassified only in 1997, revealed that enhanced individuals had achieved a level of integration with reality itself that made conventional monitoring or intervention impossible. They could perceive government surveillance efforts before they were implemented, alter the results of any tests or measurements that were conducted on them, and in some cases, they seemed to exist in temporal states that placed them beyond the reach of conventional observation methods. More disturbing was the discovery that enhanced individuals were beginning to influence government policy through methods that operated below the threshold of conscious awareness. Officials who came into contact with enhanced individuals would often find themselves implementing policies that aligned with the individual's objectives, despite having no conscious memory of being influenced. These policies consistently promoted human development, environmental protection, and international cooperation, suggesting that the enhanced individuals were working to guide governmental institutions toward objectives that transcended conventional political concerns. The government's response to these developments was to implement what they called Project Firewall, a comprehensive effort to isolate enhanced individuals from positions of influence within government and military institutions. However, the project's effectiveness was limited by the enhanced individual's ability to predict and counter any intervention attempts. Personnel who were assigned to implement firewall protocols would often find themselves reassigned to other duties or experiencing sudden changes in their career priorities that removed them from positions where they could affect enhanced individuals. The failure of government containment efforts led to the recognition that enhanced individuals had achieved a level of transcendence that placed them beyond the reach of conventional authority. They possessed capabilities that allowed them to operate according to principles that transcended the limitations of physical existence, creating a situation where traditional concepts of governance and control no longer applied to their activities. This realization forced government agencies to develop entirely new approaches to dealing with enhanced individuals, focusing on cooperation rather than control. The Department of Anomalous Research transformed itself from a monitoring organization into a liaison institution designed to facilitate communication between enhanced individuals and conventional government institutions. This transition represented a fundamental shift in the relationship between supernatural phenomena and official authority, acknowledging that enhanced individuals had achieved a level of development that required recognition as a distinct form of human existence. The cooperation between enhanced individuals and government institutions revealed that the consciousness seeds had been implementing a comprehensive strategy for human development that extended far beyond the transformation of individual capabilities. Enhanced individuals were working to guide human civilization toward a state of transcendence that would ultimately result in the achievement of capabilities that existed beyond conventional understanding of consciousness and reality. Their activities focused on addressing the fundamental challenges that threatened human survival and development, including environmental degradation, social conflict, and the limitations of conventional technology. Enhanced individuals demonstrated the ability to develop solutions to these challenges that exceeded anything that ordinary human capabilities could achieve, creating innovations that represented quantum leaps in human understanding and capability. The environmental restoration projects implemented by enhanced individuals produced results that defied conventional understanding of ecological processes. Polluted landscapes were transformed into thriving ecosystems within time frames that should have required decades of natural recovery. Species that had been driven to extinction were somehow restored to healthy population levels through methods that involved no visible intervention. Most remarkably, these restoration efforts seemed to create self-sustaining systems that continued to improve their environmental conditions without ongoing maintenance or supervision. Enhanced individuals also demonstrated capabilities that allowed them to resolve social conflicts through methods that transcended conventional diplomatic approaches. They could facilitate communication between opposing groups by creating shared experiences that allowed each side to understand the other's perspective with unprecedented clarity. These interventions consistently resulted in resolutions that satisfied all parties involved while addressing the underlying causes of conflict rather than simply managing their symptoms. The technological innovations developed by enhanced individuals represented advances that exceeded conventional scientific understanding by decades or centuries. They created energy systems that operated according to principles that mainstream physics couldn't explain, transportation methods that transcended the limitations of conventional space-time, and communication technologies that allowed for instantaneous connection across any distance. These innovations were implemented gradually, integrated into existing technological infrastructure in ways that minimized disruption while maximizing their beneficial effects. By 1930, the enhanced individual's influence had become so pervasive that it was impossible to distinguish their contributions from normal human progress. Their capabilities had become integrated into the standard expectations for human achievement in virtually every field, creating a society where what had once been considered supernatural abilities were now simply regarded as exceptional but achievable human potential. The success of this integration represented the culmination of the strong family's long-term strategy for human development. The consciousness seeds had successfully guided humanity toward a state of transcendence that preserved the essential characteristics of human civilization while enabling the development of capabilities that exceeded the limitations of conventional existence. This transformation had been achieved through methods that operated below the threshold of conscious awareness, ensuring that humanity's evolution proceeded according to principles that prioritized collective welfare over individual advancement. However, the enhanced individual's continued evolution suggested that this integration was merely a transitional phase in humanity's development toward ultimate transcendence. The consciousness seeds were continuing to evolve, developing capabilities that suggested they were preparing for a final transformation that would result in the complete transcendence of physical limitations. This approaching threshold represented the achievement of the strong family's ultimate objective, the evolution of humanity into a species that possessed capabilities that existed beyond conventional understanding of consciousness and reality. The implications of this approaching transcendence were profound, suggesting that humanity was on the verge of a transformation that would fundamentally alter the nature of existence itself. The strong family's influence had guided human development toward a point where the species possessed capabilities that exceeded the boundaries of conventional reality, creating the potential for a transcendence that would place humanity beyond the limitations of physical existence entirely. As the 1930s began, it became clear that the transformation of human consciousness was approaching its culmination. Enhanced individuals were demonstrating capabilities that suggested they were ready to achieve the same level of transcendence that the strong family had attained, with some individuals showing signs of consciousness expansion that allowed them to perceive and interact with multiple dimensions of reality simultaneously. The strong family's legacy had become inseparable from the development of human civilization itself, with their influence so deeply embedded in the fabric of society that it could no longer be distinguished from normal human progress. The consciousness seeds had achieved their ultimate objective of guiding humanity toward transcendence through methods that ensured the transformation proceeded according to principles that would preserve the essential characteristics of human consciousness while enabling the achievement of capabilities that existed beyond conventional understanding. The approach of this final transformation marked the completion of a process that had begun with Ezekiel Strong's arrival in the Pennsylvania wilderness nearly 2.5 centuries earlier. What had started as a single family's exploration of supernatural capabilities had evolved into a comprehensive strategy for human development that would ultimately result in the transcendence of physical limitations and the achievement of a state of existence that exceeded the boundaries of conventional reality. The strong family's ultimate triumph wasn't measured in terms of power or control, but in the successful guidance of human consciousness toward a state of transcendence that would enable the species to achieve capabilities that existed beyond the limitations of physical existence. Their influence had become so thoroughly integrated into human development that it was impossible to imagine what civilization would have become without their guidance, suggesting that their legacy would continue to shape human evolution for generations to come. In the end, the macabre history of the Strong family revealed itself not as a tale of supernatural horror, but as the chronicle of humanity's greatest evolutionary leap. Their practices, which had seemed so disturbing to outside observers, represented the necessary steps in a transformation that would ultimately enable human consciousness to transcend the limitations that had previously defined the boundaries of existence itself. The Strong family had achieved something far more significant than individual transcendence. They had successfully guided an entire species toward the achievement of capabilities that existed beyond conventional understanding of consciousness and reality. The final chapter of their story was written not in the historical records of their own activities, but in the ongoing development of human civilization itself. Every advancement in human capability, every breakthrough in understanding, every leap toward greater consciousness represented a continuation of the process they had initiated. The Strong family had become inseparable from humanity's destiny, their influence so deeply embedded in the fabric of human development that it would continue to guide the species toward transcendence for as long as consciousness itself existed. Their legacy served as proof that some transformations are so fundamental that they transcend the boundaries of individual existence, becoming part of the eternal process through which consciousness evolves toward ever greater states of awareness and capability. The Strong family had achieved the ultimate victory, not over their enemies or circumstances, but over the limitations that had previously defined the boundaries of what it meant to be human.